Well, it's pretty hard to be anything but high on what Mike Elko has done so far as Texas A&M's head coach. He's done a lot. He's put together a great staff. He put together a great portal class. He finished recruiting strong. From what we see behind the scenes, this team is working, growing together, becoming more competitive, becoming more focused on the ultimate goal of winning in the fall. But that's just it. We're not there yet. We haven't seen the wins on the field yet. So everything that we're positive about, everything we're happy about right now, it's all on paper. It's great. We love what we're seeing. But we have to be real about things at some point. And if you follow my channel, if you follow me, you know I like to talk about sports in a somewhat positive light. I don't like to focus on the negative. I don't like to dwell on the negative, the bad news, the ugly stuff. We'll talk about it when it needs to happen. We'll bring it up. I'm real. I try to be forthcoming with everything that I think about this team, positive or negative. But we do talk about the positive more. It's what we do. So in this video, after all we've been talking about, all this awesome stuff that the first 3 months of Mike Elko's tenure has brought Texas A&M, I want to bring up some concerns. Because no program in the country is ever without concerns. And some might have more concerns than others. Some might have more glaring weaknesses or holes than others. A&M's in a transition year. That is still the case. So there will still be holes that come innately with that condition. This is a new roster, a lot of new players, new faces. There are position groups that last year were quite frankly pretty bad. And a lot of those guys will be back next year. Or maybe it'll be a whole new group of players in certain position groups that have a lot of question marks over them. So today I wanted to get in front of everything and bring all of my concerns up. And I want to bring some of your concerns up too. I went to X and I asked some of you guys what some of your concerns about this team going forward is. And keep in mind, this is before spring. This is before we've seen that first iteration of the team. And you guys had some great responses. I want to bring some of those up at the end. So guys, I want to bring up my concerns, talk about your concerns, and then hopefully you guys can comment some things you need to still see play out. You know, in making this list, I do have concerns, but I don't think any of my concerns are not able to be addressed within a few glimpses of this team or things that could hold this team back from some pretty nice goals next year. I don't see any major valleys in this team, major holes, major question marks that are going to make you scratch your head looking at this team on a Saturday in the fall. Some of these concerns are more moderate than others, but I would say moderate is my highest level of concern, moderately concerned. But most of these things are pretty minor. So guys, let's get into it. But first, if you guys could like and subscribe, that would help me greatly. I'm trying to keep growing this thing throughout the offseason, bringing you guys consistent content while we don't have football on Saturdays. And of course, in the fall, we'll be bringing you multiple videos a week. And we still do the live show. That's year-round, Thursdays, 8 p.m. Central. Tune into that. You guys can call in. We can talk Aggie football, talk college football, talk about whatever you want, especially during the offseason. We talk about some crazy things. I think last week we talked about In-N-Out and Whataburger, that whole debate. Some people are still Team Whataburger. It's fallen off quite a bit if you ask me. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into some of my concerns about this team going into next year. All right, so I said I have some moderate concerns, so I guess I'll start with my most pressing concerns, I guess. And like I said, none of these are going to hold the team back necessarily, but they could. These are things that we need to see addressed, that we need answers for. And hopefully, when that test gets handed out, the results we'll get will be at least passing, but hopefully an A. So a couple of these, probably on the top of your mind, probably things that you've heard about when listening to talking heads about this team or talking about this team amongst your friends. First and foremost is that corner position. Last year, in my opinion, it was the biggest weakness on the team, even more so than the offensive line. I know the O-line had some really bad moments, but I think the corner position is the one position that I can say single-handedly cost A&M several games last year. And it wasn't necessarily because of the starters. I thought Tyreek Chappelle and Deuce Harmon, when they played together, I thought they were a pretty nice duo. Not perfect, but serviceable. But the problem was, behind them, you had players out of position, you had depth issues, you had young guys. It looked really, really bad, and it was very, very apparent when one of those two guys was out. I think about the Ole Miss game. I think about the Alabama game. Those two games are games where I think you have better corners, you win those games. They were super close, and I think if you had some serviceable guys that hopefully you'll have next year, you would have won them. So obviously, you're having a whole host of changes at that position. All new names besides Chappelle and a couple of those younger freshmen that were here before in Javen Thomas and Bravion Rogers. But besides that, you're going to see a whole host of new players. A&M got a bunch of players. We've talked about them extensively on this channel. You have your Des Ricks, your Will Lees, you have your BJ Mays. You have a bunch of guys, more than the ones I mentioned now, because a lot of these guys, they're multi-positional kinds of players, versatile guys that could play either the safety position, the nickel, or corner. So there could be even more players in this group than we even realize at the time right now. Guys can move around. So what you're going to see is wholesale changes at the position. You're going to see new faces. You're going to see a bunch of new. And that's going to be a theme as we go through these concerns. There's so much new on this team. When you have a coaching change, especially in the transfer portal era of college football, you're looking at changes not only in philosophy from the coaching level, but also changes of personnel with players leaving and players coming, more so than just freshmen and seniors. You're talking about transfers now. So a bunch of new all across the board, but specifically at corner. Now, I'll say this about corner. I have it at my moderate level of concern. It's not a high concern. I wouldn't put any of these at that, DEFCON 10 doomsday levels of concern. I'm not there with any of these. We're starting with the moderate. The reason it's only moderate is because it was really bad last year. First of all, how can it get worse? I mean, that's easy to say. Those are words that sound good, but seriously, could it get much worse than it was at times last year? So that gives me some hope that with new bodies and new faces, new coaching philosophies, you have a chance to improve there. It's the level of improvement. What are you going to get out of these guys? What are you going to get out of a new group of guys? It's a very much a new room, guys. You have like 3 or 4 guys back. So with all the change, with such a new look at that position, it's going to be a question mark until we see it. It's going to be a question mark until we see it versus Notre Dame in week 1. And it might be an ongoing thing throughout the year. It's going to be one of those things where you need to see it probably week to week improving and kind of ramping up throughout the season. But can it be good enough week 1 versus Notre Dame? That's a big question mark about this specific position group. But you can kind of face that same question towards the entirety of the team with so much new, especially on the defense. And we'll transition to another concern I have on defense, and it's linebacker. So Torin York is back, but Edgerrin Cooper's gone. Obviously, Edgerrin Cooper was a hell of a talent. He finally put it all together, took the leap in his final season at A&M, and he was a superstar, maybe the best linebacker in the country. You also lose Chris Russell, the senior leader off the bench. He was a guy that got a lot of snaps. He played a lot of reps as the third linebacker in that group. And what we had last year was really a 3-man linebacker rotation. Edge played almost the whole game. Torian played almost the whole game. Then Chris Russell would sub in for either one. So you had a very shallow position, of which you lose 2 of your rotational guys. So yeah, we're really high on Torin York. Apparently he was the guy calling plays, making plays at the line, getting players into alignment, and he let Edgerrin Cooper play. That's kind of what we gather from what Jimbo said about him throughout the year last year. Just a guy with a really, really good head on his shoulders. But how can a guy like that do without a guy like Edgerrin Cooper next to him? Will his play take a dip without that guy to kind of take the pressure off of him, to know you have that star next to you? That's actually the least of my concerns, because I do think Torin York is a really, really smart and heady guy. He has it really strong between the ears, and I think he's the kind of guy that can navigate this transition really well. Where my main question is, and it's the obvious glaring concern there, is who fills in for Edgerrin Cooper. You have a host of guys there, too, that are new. Could it be Alex Howard out of Youngstown State, the guy that brings the most maturity and experience of that whole group, not including time at A&M, obviously? Will it be a Scooby Williams, the guy that maybe slightly underperformed at Florida but was a highly touted guy coming out of high school? Will it be someone else from within the team last year who we didn't really see much, like a Damian Sanford or a Martrell Harris, who I once deemed as one of the pivotal players for the future of this team, considering we figured that Edge Cooper and Chris Russell would be gone after this year? We didn't really see him last year. So you have some young guys too. You have your Jordan Lockhart. You have your Tristan Jernigan. Torin York's a young guy. Damian Sanford's a young guy. The future of this position group looks really, really solid. But how does this team respond to losing those 2 leaders in a week 1 game versus Notre Dame? I'm going to keep coming back to that, because this is how this works. You're in the trenches in week 1. You have Notre Dame at home. Then you're traveling to the Swamp 2 weeks later. That could either be a huge boost for your program, early weeks of Mike Elko, or it can really screw your team up if you slip up in those games, especially if you slip up versus Florida. And we'll talk more about the schedule over the course of the offseason, but that Florida game is huge for Florida. If you haven't seen how the home stretch of their schedule looks next year, It's brutal. It's like 7 top 12 matchups in a row. They have to win that early game versus A&M at home. That's one of their must-win games on the year. And for A&M, that's the first road test in Mike Elko's tenure. That's a road game that A&M has been terrible in historically over the last 5-6 years. A&M's been terrible on the road. We know this. So you don't have much time to get these things together. So that's why I kind of led this list with these two, what I think are the most glaring personnel holes on the team. There are players to fill both the corner and the linebacker spot. But can they do it quickly and effectively, at least enough to beat Notre Dame in week 1? So I'm staying on the defensive side of the ball, and this would be my last, what I would consider moderate level of concern. And some of you guys, this might be a hot take. Some of you might not agree with this. But I have my concerns about the D-line, guys. I do. Now, at the top, you have a couple of beasts that we're very, very confident in. Shamar Turner, Nick Scorton. These are guys that we can rely on game to game, down to down, to be star-level players. Behind them, I would say the next tier of player is probably Shamar Stewart in a tier of his own. Now, I think Shamar Stewart maybe could have the single-handed most impact on this defensive line because he's at a point where if he develops, he takes the next step in his career, you're talking about a guy that could be in that top tier of players that I just mentioned. He could be sitting there with Shamar Turner and Nick Scorton as those guys that you're relying on game to game as your star players, as your consistent producers. But he has to take the leap. I feel like he will. Based on what we've seen from him, he's so physical. He was solid last year. I always say he was like a hair away from being that guy, but he has to get there. And then behind him, you have your Albert Regis, who would be kind of your last experienced guy coming back. And then you have DJ Hicks and Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy. And these are guys who we've seen glimpses of in a really big way, but we haven't seen relied upon in a meaningful stretch. We saw them in the bowl game for a pretty good amount of time. They both had good moments. But can these guys be starter-level players on an SEC team next August, next September, early in the season? Can we rely on them already? I tend to think that we can, but I haven't gotten to where I'm actually concerned yet. With those interior guys, GBD, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, DJ Hicks, and Albert Regis, those 3 guys, what's your rotation behind them? Who's the next guy up? Who are you relying on? That's my big question mark because, D-line, you're going to see injuries. You're going to see a lot of rotation on the defensive line. It's how it happens. We think Shamar Turner's going to move inside. We think Nick Scorton's flexible. But we've only listed a few guys that I think are surefire producers. There's a lot of question marks behind them. Now, I'll say this. You have some versatility here. At defensive end position, the edge kind of model guys, like the guys that are the twitchy, pass-rushing type, you got some guys to play around with there. You have Cassius Howell, the 10-sack man out of Bowling Green from last year. He transfers in. I think he's a guy that plays situationally. He plays a lot. Now, we think Malik Silla and Eni White are about to take that next step. I feel like they're going to. We haven't seen it yet, though. It's another thing that we've yet to see that we're going to have to rely on for next year because you got to believe those guys have to play. You got to believe they're going to move Nick Scorton and Shamar Turner inside at times because of personnel deficiencies. You don't have a bunch of big dudes anymore, but you have a versatile D-line that Elko and Bateman are going to get very, very creative with. That's the exciting part of it. But how is this team doing later in games? Are you able to go as deep off the bench as we did before to get your guys rest, to get looks from other guys? It doesn't feel like you're really going to have that, at least on the interior. But they may be able to make up for that with creativity. I bring some level of concern to this position group next year. You lost a bunch of guys. You lost your rotation over the last couple of years for the most part. You have Shamar Turner and Shamar Stewart back. Albert Regis was in the rotation. That's 3 guys in the rotation back. And then you have Nick Scorton now, star, and at another university, obviously. It's not a lot of returning production. It's not. So I have a level of concern here because in the SEC, you need depth at that position group. It's one of my concerns, guys. It just is. So defensively, overall, a lot of new. A lot of different. And this is kind of the overarching moderate concern on this team. Can Elko build an elite defense in year 1 despite all of these changes? I know we're confident in Elko. I know we feel good about his ability to coach this defense, to coach this team. But how much of an effect can he have on it? Is Jay Bateman going to have a bigger role in that? Whatever that is, whatever. I think they'll be fine. it's just a lot of new to manage with a schedule that demands a lot from you early. So I think defensively, with all the new, overall, that is my biggest concern going into next season. Now moving on to some of my lesser concerns that I still have question marks about these things, maybe not as big as that defensive hurdle, but these are things to keep in mind as we move forward into this Elko tenure. So it's a new coaching staff, guys, across the board, new people, new philosophies, new culture. Everything's different. Everything's fresh. How quickly can this team, first of all, just pick up the playbook? I mean, you're talking about every position group on this team learning new philosophies. So we talk about the coordinator switch. I've talked about the coordinator switch being a hurdle to get over for teams. You replace your offensive coordinator, learn the new offense. That's a hurdle. Same thing can happen defensive coordinator. This is across the board. Can this team pick up what Elko is teaching, what Moffitt is instilling in these guys, what Colin Klein and Jay Bateman are drawing up for these guys? Can that stuff be translated by week 1 next year? That's always my question with transition teams. Now, what we've seen before that could be a positive out of this is harder to scout. It's harder to scout this new conglomerate of people and personalities and coaching staffs and philosophies merging together. It's harder for teams to predict exactly what they're going to see next year as far as opponents of A&M. So it could be a positive. It could be a lightning in the bottle scenario because of this. But the other way it goes is it's just too much learning on the fly to have a successful year 1. So this is going to be a question with any team that goes through transition. I have total confidence in this staff. We've talked about this being, in my opinion, an A+ staff, but you still have the hurdle of learning to get over. So that's going to be one of my mid-level concerns is, can they learn what this staff is wanting to do by Notre Dame? The running game. Now we're moving to the offensive side of the ball finally. I have fewer significant questions about the offensive side of the ball. We'll talk about it right now. Running game. It wasn't good last year. We had issues blocking. I think we had vision issues between some of the running backs. Le'Veon Moss couldn't stay healthy. So first of all, can Le'Veon Moss stay healthy? Where's his head at? We don't know. There's been some off-the-field stuff with him. He didn't travel to the bowl game. We heard coaches talking about how we need to pray for him. We saw some weird cryptic tweets coming from him. Is Le'Veon Moss good? Is he going to play for us next year? Is he healthy? I really hope so. Really like what that guy brings to the table. He's the guy that needs the least amount of space to make things happen. He's not afraid of contact. He drives people forward. We love Le'Veon Moss. I think I've been saying he's the future of the running back position. Him and Reuben Owens, and that's the next point here. Has Reuben Owens continued to improve? Will his vision improve? Will he be able to find the hole? Will he be able to flow with the offensive line? Will he be able to play off of them? Because there were times last year where, yes, the O-line was bad last year, but there were holes there that were missed by the young Reuben Owens. He got better and better as the year went on. And it wasn't like a sharp rise. It was a steady, gradual improvement. Will that continue? Can he take the leap next year? And can the O-line play their part as well? All right, so this is a two-parter here. Now, the running back position is the lesser of my concerns. Oh, one more thing on the running back position. Depth. You only have 4 guys. You have those 2, Amari Daniels and E.J. Smith, and I have a feeling we're going to see all 4 of them in situations. What happens if 1 goes down? What happens if 2 go down? This may be a priority spring window target in the transfer portal. But anyway, depth is an issue there too for now. Now, moving on to the larger area of concern here, the O-line, the O-line's consistency, players regressing. Is there enough to say that there's addition by subtraction here? Was it Adazio? Was Steve Adazio the reason for this O-line's shortcoming? The reason I tend to say yes, that there was some sort of disconnect between what was being taught, what was expected of the players, and what the players were doing on the field, there was something going on there. It may have to do with Adazio's old school style of coaching. I don't know what it was. It may have been Jimbo's offense. Who knows? We saw regression over the last 2 years. We saw subpar play over the last 2 years. We saw inconsistency. We've seen quarterbacks getting hurt. So I'm particularly singling out the run game here, but since we're talking about the O-line, hand in hand with this, pass pro is bad too. Was it the chicken or the egg? Are these players just players that are underperforming in their careers? Were we scapegoating Adazio? Or is it going to be a different thing under Adam Cushing and Colin Klein? Now, Colin Klein will probably get these offensive linemen in better position to succeed with some of the pull blocks, the counter pulls that we're going to see in his system. I feel pretty good that I feel pretty confident thinking the system will help these guys out. But we also saw a lot of individual mistakes on this O-line net last year. We saw a lot of players just whiff on assignments, whiff on blocks, standing upright at times, not getting low, basic fundamental things. We saw players regress. Ruben Fothery, Bryce Foster, unfortunately, both regressed. And those are both guys that we're huge fans of. We wanted to see progress after their promising 2021. So this has to be a question mark going forward. So running game, first of all, but then let's single out the O-line here. And when I asked this question on Twitter, what are some of your concerns? Half the concerns y'all answered with was the offensive line, just O-line. That's the question mark. So O-line, corner, those were the two kisses of death for this team last year. Got to keep Connor healthy. So a minor concern of mine, going off of that, how healthy is Connor? Is Connor 100% next year? Is Connor able to run around and scramble and put entire trust into that injured foot next year? What else can you say? You really hope so. He's been rehabbing like a monster. You know he's been working really hard based on the interviews we've gotten from him, based on what we've heard from him. We know he's working hard. But are we going to get 100% Connor Wigman come fall 2024? Because what I've been saying about this team is if you want this team to reach its ceiling, if you want this team to get to that 10-win marker, you need the best Connor Wigman that you can get. You need Connor to be a fringe Heisman guy at least. And we know he has that in him. From the glimpses we've seen, we know the tools that Connor Wigman possesses. Is he able to use them to his fullest ability next year? Only time will tell there. We won't know until we see it. Feet injuries are weird, man. They can linger. I think the timing was good enough to where he can be 100% by fall. I don't think he'll be 100% in spring. I think that's pretty apparent at this point. Can he be 100% by fall? We'll see. So, guys, those are my biggest concerns on this team. It's the defense as a whole, but particularly the corner rotation, the linebacker room, then defensive line depth. Offensively, can they get a running game going? Can the running backs and the O-line play off each other? Can this O-line protect? Can this O-line be productive? One more thing on the O-line that bodes well for its chances next year and why it's not one of my major concerns. What was the one good O-line under Jimbo Fisher? It was that 2020 year. Maybe Jimbo's scheme was not O-line friendly. I don't know. But that 2020 year found some success, and I think that was because it was a senior, veteran, smart, grizzled offensive line. That's what you're going to have next year. You're going to have an upperclassman dominant offensive line, not only starting five, but room. A bunch of older dudes will be taking the field on that offensive side of the line of scrimmage next year, and I think that bodes really well for their chances of improvement. That, and I really like Adam Cushing, guys. If you haven't looked up an Adam Cushing interview yet, go look at one of his coaching clinics or something. He seems like a really cool, down-to-earth guy, really logical guy. I think you'll really like him if you start looking into him, and he's the new O-line coach, and I think he could deliver a really good message to these guys. So I want to get into some of your concerns now. I asked on Twitter, what are some honest questions or concerns you have about the team as of right now? What are some things that scare you or things that you really need to see play out on the field to learn more about? So you guys were great. Bunch of answers. I'm going to single out 3 or 4 here. So Texas Hill Country says, my main concern this year is all about program momentum. A 7 or 5 or less year will give Texas a huge edge in the coming years for recruiting battles, claiming A&M produced nothing with top talent. This year has to be a statement. He goes on to say down here, I think even before the Jimbo announcement this year, the class was stacked, but many guys were on the fringe, visiting elsewhere, not fully locked in because of lack of results. I don't think Elko will have as long a leash with his recruits due to Jimbo's run. Yes, negative recruiting is very much a thing. Coaches, opposing coaches, will point that out. So he's just kind of saying this is a make or break year. This is a very important year for the program moving forward because we were able to put together a good recruiting class. He wants this program momentum to keep shooting forward. So this is an overarching thing. This is more of a results concern more so than a practicality concern, but I do like it. Imagine how this team can start recruiting if you start winning 10 games. They've been recruiting pretty well, only winning a couple games. So his main concern is about recruiting if you don't put a good year together under Mike Elko in year 1. It's a valid concern. Wayne says, will we have decreases in injury occurrence because that was a major issue for several seasons? And will we have consistency on both sides of the ball? You can see right there, I really hope Moffitt gets this team not only tougher and stronger, but more mentally resilient. We talked about this, how last year it did seem like players were sitting out or not practicing due to nagging injuries that maybe could have been played for. This was evident by one of Jimbo's pressers where he actually called the team out for this, I think during fall camp last year, when he indicated that players were missing practice for small injuries. I think the team needs another level of toughness next year, and this is a great thing to bring up. Obviously, injuries have been plaguing this team like nothing else the last few years. I think Tommy Moffitt somewhat addresses that. I think he's going to instill a stronger work ethic and a stronger mentality in this team, and I think that's really where it all starts, is between the ears. Confidence, mentality, and then just straight up weight room gains. We need gains. We need stronger players. We need tougher players. We need players in better shape. So it's a good point. Injuries have been a problem. That's a valid concern. Finally, TBD season. The biggest thing that scares me is simply his lack of head coach experience. Another thing is, what does he do if the defense struggles? He wants to not call plays, but he feels the team would benefit more if he was a play caller. What does he do, and how does he handle this adversity? Okay, yes, but I also sense a little bit of Jimbo scarring here as I read this again, because that was the concern with Jimbo and Bobby Petrino last year. What happens when Jimbo's not happy with the offense and he wants to take the thing away from Bobby's hands? I don't know if that ever happened, but I don't know if it was ever really truly Bobby's offense. Anyway, it's true. We're looking at a third-year head coach at this level of football and a first year in the SEC. It's a big jump. It's a big deal. But from all accounts, Elko does seem like a very organized, intelligent person. I think he has it between the ears. But what happens once he gets punched in the mouth? What happens if A&M loses an early game? What happens if the defense struggles a game? Is he going to stay faithful to the plan? I think he will. I'm not too concerned with Elko on that front, but I think that he alludes to kind of the defensive struggles this team might have, and I do think this team might have some early defensive struggles. If they don't, and this defense hits the ground running next year, I'll be shocked. I'll be shocked if they're looking like a finished project early in the year next year. Now, I think they could perform well enough to win games, don't get me wrong, but I think we look at this team next September versus next November, it's a different defense, just based on how much new there is out there. We talked about that as my main concern on this team. So I think that Bateman was a good choice for the kind of guy that's going to do exactly what Elko's vision is for this defense to do. I think they're pretty a pretty hand-in-glove fit there, so I actually don't have that concern. But you do bring up a good point about what happens with adversity. What happens when this team gets punched in the mouth? We feel good about Elko, though, right, guys? So, guys, I'll leave you with a question. What are your concerns? Leave it in the comments down below, and maybe we'll address it in the call-in show next time, Thursday at 8 p.m., and we'll bring up some of your concerns, because I think I listed the major ones. I think it's the corner, the linebacker, offensive line. Those are going to be the ones that everyone talks about. But I just look at so much new and so much transition this year. But, guys, let's not get down on this thing. I think this team wins more than 7 games next year. I think I'm at 8 wins as the floor right now, personally. And like I said, I'm Mr. Positivity. At the beginning of this video, I told you guys that. These concerns are not program-altering negatives. We're not looking at glaring holes on this team. We just have some questions that we need answers to, man. And we're going to get some in spring. So, guys, I'll see you very soon with some more spring preview videos. I'll see you guys in the live show Thursday night, 8 p.m. Central. If you missed this week, I'll see you next week. We'll keep doing this thing. Until then, guys, like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Yig'em. Oh, and we beat that Texas ass in baseball, didn't we?